My name is Clara Vance. I'm 29, and my life took an unexpected turn last month when my grandfather, Arthur, left me an inheritance of $750,000. The real surprise wasn't the sum of money itself. It was finding myself seated at a polished cherry wood coffee table in our formal living room, a space my mother, Isabel, reserved only for show. I was surrounded by men in sharp suits whom she introduced as old family associates. A practiced smile was fixed on her face, but it never quite reached her eyes. She gave a subtle nod to a notary, who then slid a stack of legal documents across the glossy surface toward me. "It's just a formality, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "The family has a greater need for this than you do." Their expressions turned to stone when I calmly picked up the papers, offered a smile of my own, and said, "Actually, before we get to that, I have something I think you all should see. If you're watching this from a place where your family understands the meaning of boundaries, let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to see how I dismantled this elaborate trap." Growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, I learned from a young age that my mother, Isabel, had a deeply troubled relationship with money. By troubled, I mean it was an absolute catastrophe. It was as if money was water and her hands were a net, holding onto nothing but the fleeting shimmer of whatever she bought. When I was 13, I saw something that permanently altered my understanding of our family's inner workings. I was supposed to be asleep, but had crept downstairs for a drink. That's when I heard my grandmother, Helen, weeping in the kitchen. Peeking through the slightly ajar door, I saw her hands shaking as she held a checkbook. "Isabel, this is the 4th time this year," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father and I don't have a bottomless well of money. This was for our retirement." My mother just waved a dismissive hand. "Mom, it's a temporary loan. The commission from the Ardmore property will settle everything next month." There was always a next month. Always a new commission just around the corner. Always a fresh reason why this time was going to be different. My grandmother, her shoulders slumped in resignation, wrote the check anyway. My mother was a real estate agent, which meant her income was a roller coaster. The profitable months financed extravagant shopping trips and impulsive vacations. The lean months brought a flood of overdue notices and desperate phone calls to relatives. Despite this financial chaos, she insisted on maintaining a lifestyle we couldn't sustain, living in a prestigious neighborhood, leasing luxury cars, and buying designer outfits that still had the tags on when the credit card statements arrived. My grandfather Arthur was the complete opposite. Every Saturday morning, starting when I was 10, he would take me for a walk along the pier. Over hot chocolate, he taught me about savings, the power of compound interest, and the freedom that comes from living within your means. "The most valuable things in life aren't things at all, Clara," he'd tell me, using the special name he had for me. "Financial stability gives you the liberty to choose your own way." He never criticized my mother directly in my presence, but his disappointment was etched in the tight lines around his mouth whenever her name came up. Instead, he invested his energy in teaching me to be different. "You're a bright girl with a good head on your shoulders," he'd say. "You have the power to break this cycle." By the time I was 16, I had my first job at a local bookstore. Grandfather Arthur helped me open a savings account, and I felt a surge of pride as I watched the balance steadily increase. When I graduated from high school with honors and was accepted into a state university for graphic design, he was my biggest cheerleader, clapping until his hands were raw. College was when the financial reality truly set in. My mother had promised to contribute to my tuition. "Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. We'll handle it when the time comes," she'd said during campus visits. But when the acceptance letters came, so did the excuses. The market was in a slump. She was in between major sales. Unexpected costs had come up. I found myself juggling 2 jobs, early mornings at a coffee shop and evenings at the university library, all while managing a full course load. My grandfather helped when he could, but he was on a fixed retirement income. Despite scholarships and my own earnings, I graduated with nearly $60,000 in student debt. During my final year of college, my grandfather's health took a turn for the worse. The doctors diagnosed it as congestive heart failure. I would visit him in the hospital between my classes and work shifts, often finding him with financial journals spread over his bed tray. "I've been contemplating the future, Clara," he said during one visit. His voice was frail, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "About what I'm going to leave behind." "Grandpa, please don't talk like that," I protested, fluffing his pillows to make him more comfortable. "No, this is important," he insisted. "I've made certain arrangements. Your mother, she will come for whatever I leave you. She's always believed my money was hers, just waiting for her to claim it." I tried to dismiss his concerns, feeling uneasy with the conversation, but he gripped my hand with surprising force. "Promise me you will stand firm. What I'm leaving you is for your future, not to patch up her mistakes." I made the promise, never imagining I would have to fulfill it so soon, or in such a dramatic fashion. After I graduated, I found an entry-level job at a marketing agency in Philadelphia. The salary was modest, but it was consistent. I rented a small studio apartment, lived frugally, and made steady payments on my student loans. My grandfather called every week to check in, always asking about my savings. 3 months ago, he passed away in his sleep. The grief was immense. I had lost more than a grandfather. I had lost a mentor, a champion, and the one stable anchor in my tumultuous family. The reading of the will was a shock to everyone, particularly my mother. Grandfather Arthur had left me $750,000 in investments and his mountain cabin in the Poconos. To my mother, he left $50,000, accompanied by a simple note. "Isabel, I hope you finally discover contentment with what you possess." At the reception after the funeral, my mother hugged me tightly, her whispered, "Congratulations," a stark contrast to the calculating glint in her eyes. Less than 3 hours later, while I was helping clean up at my grandmother's house, she cornered me in the kitchen. "So," she began, leaning against the counter as I washed dishes, "that was quite the development today." "It was," I replied, concentrating on a stubborn spot on a serving dish. "You know, the roof on my house is in desperate need of repair. The roofer estimated it will be around $30,000, she said nonchalantly, as if discussing the weather. I placed the dish in the rack, my hands suddenly clammy despite the hot water. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Well, obviously you can help with that now," she pressed. "Perhaps we should get together tomorrow and work out how to transfer some funds." And so it started, just as my grandfather had predicted. I told her I needed time to process everything and that there were estate matters to sort out first. But deep down, I knew exactly what my plans were for the inheritance. pay off my student loans, buy a small condo to escape the rental cycle, and maybe, finally, launch the freelance graphic design business I had been dreaming of. My inheritance symbolized something I had never known: financial security and the freedom to make choices without a constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had no intention of watching it vanish into the black hole of my mother's spending. The first major confrontation occurred 3 weeks after the funeral. I had been avoiding my mother's increasingly persistent calls, but she finally got to me with a text designed to trigger my guilt. Need to talk. Family emergency. Coffee at the Gilded Spoon at 2. Worried something had happened to my grandmother, I agreed to meet. When I got to the bistro, Isabel was already at a corner table, impeccably dressed in a new designer outfit I didn't recognize. There was no sign of distress, no hint of an emergency. "Clara, darling," she said, air-kissing my cheek as I sat. "I've already ordered you a latte. They make them just the way you like." "What's the emergency?" I asked, getting straight to the point. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I just needed to be sure you'd come. You've been so hard to reach lately." A flash of anger rose in me, but I pushed it down. "Mom, I told you I'd call when I had things sorted out with the estate." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," she said, leaning in and lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "I've been thinking about what your grandfather would have truly wanted." "He made that quite clear in his will," I pointed out. Her smile tightened. "Legal documents can be so cold, sweetie. He and I had many discussions about family, about taking care of one another." I seriously doubted that, but I kept my silence. "The thing is," she went on, stirring her untouched cappuccino, "I'm facing some significant financial hurdles right now. The house needs work, not just the roof, but the foundation as well. And property taxes are due next month." The night before, I had seen her social media post, a picture of her brand new Lexus with the caption, "Treating myself. Life's too short to drive a boring car." The timestamp indicated she bought it just days after the will was read. "What happened to your commission from the main line property?" I asked. "You said it was your biggest sale of the year." She blinked rapidly. "Well, there were expenses, and I needed reliable transportation for showing high-end properties." Her expression hardened. "I work in luxury real estate, Clara. Image is everything." "Mom, I also saw your vacation posts. Booking a Caribbean cruise doesn't exactly scream financial crisis." "That's different," she snapped. "It's a business expense, networking with wealthy clients." I took a deep breath. "I'm not giving you the money." "Excuse me." Her voice rose, causing nearby diners to glance our way. "The inheritance is already designated. I'm paying off my student loans, buying a small property, and investing the rest." "After everything I've done for you," her eyes widened in theatrical disbelief. "I raised you by myself after your father left." "Dad paid child support until I was 18, I corrected her quietly. "And you used most of it for your own expenses." "How dare you?" She slammed her hand on the table, making the cups clatter. "I sacrificed everything for you. I worked 60-hour weeks to keep a roof over our heads." "A roof we nearly lost 3 times because you couldn't pay the mortgage," I retorted, the memories of foreclosure notices and hushed, angry arguments flooding back. "So this is my reward? You become a selfish, entitled little brat." Her voice had reached a pitch that ensured everyone in the bistro was now listening. "That money should have been mine. I am his granddaughter, and he chose to leave it to me," I stated firmly. "I am honoring his wishes." She stood up abruptly, snatching her designer handbag. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. Family takes care of family, Clara." "That's precisely what I'm doing," I replied. "I'm taking care of my future so I never have to rely on family the way you've exploited them." She stormed out, leaving me with 2 untouched lattes and a room full of curious eyes. I felt shaky, but also strangely liberated. The confrontation I had been dreading was over, and I had stood my ground, or so I believed. The next day, the calls started. First, it was Uncle Leo, my mother's older brother. "Clara, you need to rethink this," he said, his usually cheerful voice now stern. "Your mother is really in a tough spot. It's not right for you to be sitting on all that money while she's struggling." When I explained about the new car and the cruise, he hesitated. "Well, I'm sure there's a reason. Look, just help her with the roof. 20 or 30,000 is a drop in the bucket for you now." Then came the texts from Aunt Nina, which were masterpieces of passive aggression. "Family is supposed to support one another in times of need. Some people seem to have forgotten that. And your grandfather would be heartbroken to see his legacy dividing the family." My cousins, Dylan and Maya, chose their sides. Dylan suggested I was being manipulated by outside forces. Maya insisted I was being selfish and heartless. My social media became a war zone of thinly veiled jabs and relatives publicly siding with my mother. Most painfully, my grandmother Helen left tearful voicemails. "Clara, please talk to your mother. She's terribly upset. Whatever this disagreement is about, family is too precious to throw away." No one seemed to grasp that this was never just about money. It was about setting boundaries, about responsibility, and about honoring my grandfather's final wishes. Alone in my apartment that weekend, I started to question myself. Was I being unreasonable? Should I just pay for the roof repairs? Would a single payment appease my mother without feeding her destructive habits? I called my best friend, Sophie, the one person who had witnessed my family's dynamics firsthand over the years. "Are you serious?" she exclaimed when I voiced my doubts. "Clara, your mom is manipulating you, just like always. Remember senior year when she borrowed your college savings for that can't-miss investment opportunity? You never saw a dime of that back." "But the entire family is against me," I said, packing my small living room. "Because she's controlling the story," Sophie pointed out. "They're only hearing her version, and I guarantee in her version she's the martyr and you're the villain." I thought about my grandfather's parting advice, stand firm asterisk. He had anticipated this. He had tried to arm me for this exact situation. Just as my resolve was hardening again, a delivery arrived at my office, a lavish bouquet of flowers with a card. "Darling, I'm sorry for our misunderstanding. I only want what's best for you. Let's talk. Family dinner this Saturday at the house. Love, Mom." Her voicemail later that evening was conciliatory, almost meek. "Clara, honey, I know I came on too strong. I was just emotional after losing Dad, and I handled it all wrong. Can we have a fresh start? Just a quiet family dinner. Your grandmother will be there. She misses you." Against my better judgment and Sophie's stark warning that it screamed of a trap, I agreed to go. I even baked my grandfather's favorite apple crumble as a peace offering. Before driving to my childhood home that Saturday, I made a quick call to Julia Rios, the attorney who was guiding me through the estate process. "Just be cautious, Clara," Julia advised. "Don't sign a single thing, no matter how trivial it seems. And if you feel cornered at any point, you have every right to walk out." I promised to be careful, then picked up the apple crumble and drove toward what I hoped would be a reconciliation, but feared would be another battlefield. As I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in, alarm bells began blaring in my mind. In addition to my mother's new Lexus, Uncle Leo's Cadillac, and Aunt Nina's SUV, there were 5 other unfamiliar cars lining the street. This was definitely not the intimate family dinner my mother had promised. I sat in my car for a moment, debating whether I should just drive away before anyone saw me. But that would only postpone whatever confrontation was waiting inside. It was better to face it now, on my own terms, than to be ambushed later. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the apple crumble and walked to the front door. Before my knuckles could even touch the wood, the door swung open. My mother stood there, dressed in a formal black dress that felt wildly inappropriate for a simple family dinner. "Clara, you made it!" she cried, pulling me into an overly enthusiastic hug. Her perfume was cloying, and her smile looked like it was painted on. "Everyone is waiting for you in the living room." The house smelled of lasagna, my favorite childhood dish, a detail that felt deliberately chosen to disarm me. As I walked into the living room, my worst fears were realized. The formal room was filled not just with family, but with strangers in suits. My grandmother Helen sat at one end of the sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable. Uncle Leo and Aunt Nina were positioned on either side of an empty armchair, clearly intended for me. 3 men I had never met before sat opposite them. "Clara, honey," my mother announced with theatrical cheerfulness. "You know the family, of course. And these are our friends Marcus Thorne, Kevin Reed, and Roger Sterling." The men nodded in unison as she introduced them. Marcus, a man with silver hair and piercing eyes, rose to shake my hand. "Miss Vance, it's a pleasure. I've heard so much about you." "Funny," I replied, setting the apple crumble on a side table. "I've heard nothing about you." An awkward silence hung in the air before my mother let out a laugh that was a little too loud. "Clara always had such a unique sense of humor. Let's all have a seat, shall we? Dinner is served." As we moved to the dining room and plates were passed, the conversation remained painfully superficial. They asked about my job, commented on the weather, and complimented my appearance. It was all so staged and artificial that I could barely eat the lasagna, even though it was cooked to perfection. After dinner, as my mother served coffee, Uncle Leo cleared his throat and began what was obviously a rehearsed monologue. "Clara, we've all gathered here tonight because we care about you and the future of this family," he started, folding his hands on the table. "Recent events have created a difficult situation, and we believe it's time for a frank discussion about responsibility." My mother picked up the thread without missing a beat. "Darling, while your grandfather had every right to distribute his assets as he chose, we're concerned about your lack of experience in managing such a large sum of money." "I'm 29 years old with a college degree and a career," I pointed out. "I'm not exactly a child." "Of course not," Marcus Thorne interjected smoothly. "But managing an estate requires specialized expertise. I've been the family's financial advisor for years, and I've seen how even seasoned investors can make costly errors." That was the first outright lie. My grandfather had managed his own finances with precision and had never once mentioned a financial advisor named Marcus Thorne. Roger Sterling, the youngest of the three men, opened a leather portfolio. "We've taken the liberty of preparing some documents that would protect both your interests and the family's." "What kind of documents?" I asked, my voice steady despite my heart pounding against my ribs. "Just a simple transfer of the assets into a family trust," my mother explained with forced casualness. "You would still be the beneficiary of the inheritance, of course, but experienced professionals would manage it." Kevin Reed, who I now guessed was a notary from the stamp I could see in his briefcase, nodded encouragingly. "It's a very standard procedure in cases like this." "And who would be in control of this trust?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well, I would serve as the primary trustee," my mother said, "with Leo as the secondary. It's the most logical arrangement." Aunt Nina reached over and patted my hand. "Clara, we're family. We only want what's best for everyone. Your grandfather wouldn't want his legacy to tear us apart." Uncle Leo nodded gravely. "The stress of handling all this is clearly taking a toll on you. You look exhausted, kid. Let us take this burden off your shoulders." They took turns, one by one, applying pressure with subtle guilt trips, appeals to family loyalty, and reminders of all the sacrifices my mother had supposedly made for me. My grandmother remained mostly silent, dabbing her eyes with a tissue whenever someone mentioned my grandfather. Finally, Roger slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "If you'll just review and sign these, we can put all this unpleasantness behind us and move forward as a united family." I glanced at the first page and immediately saw phrases like "irrevocable transfer of assets" and "trustees' sole discretion regarding distributions." Further down, even more disturbing language jumped out at me. "Grantor acknowledges potential lack of financial capacity and recognizes the need for supervision in financial matters." They weren't just trying to seize my inheritance. They were trying to build a case that I was mentally unfit to manage my own life. My hands started to tremble, not with fear, but with pure rage. My pulse throbbed in my ears. "I need to use the restroom," I managed to say, standing up suddenly. "I'd like a moment to think about all this." My mother nodded benevolently. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need." I locked the bathroom door behind me, leaned against the cool porcelain of the sink, and took several deep, shuddering breaths. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "They'll come for whatever I leave you. Stand firm." I pulled out my phone and sent Julia a quick, frantic text summarizing the situation. Her reply was instant and clear. "Do not sign. Those clauses about financial capacity could be used to challenge your competence in court. It's a setup." A second text followed. "Is PA a one-party consent state for recording?" It was. Pennsylvania law permitted recording a conversation as long as one party consented. Me. With a surge of newfound clarity, I activated the recording app on my phone, splashed cold water on my face, and prepared to walk back into that dining room. This was no longer just about money. This was about confronting years of emotional manipulation and drawing a line in the sand, once and for all. I returned to the table with a composed demeanor, taking my seat and reaching for my water glass. "I'd like some time to have these documents reviewed thoroughly before I sign anything," I said, my voice much steadier than I felt. Of course, Marcus Thorne replied, though his smile had tightened. Although everything is quite standard, we could clarify any questions you have right now. I took a sip of water, pretending to look over the papers again, buying myself a moment. I see there's some language in here about my lack of financial capacity. Could you elaborate on what that means exactly? A flicker of unease passed between my mother and the attorney. Oh, that's just legal boilerplate, Thorne said dismissively. Nothing to worry about. And this part about the trustee having sole discretion over distributions, that would mean my mother gets to decide if and when I receive any money from my own inheritance, correct? Uncle Leo leaned forward. Clara, you're getting bogged down in legal details. The point is, this protects the family legacy. You mean it gives my mother control over my grandfather's money? I corrected him. The money he specifically chose to leave to me, not to her. My mother's synthetic smile was beginning to crack. Clara, you're being difficult. We are trying to help you. I set the documents down and looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each family member. They were all expecting me to fold, to be the obedient daughter I had always been. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife as I reached for my purse. The moment they saw the movement, thinking I was getting a pen, a triumphant smile spread across my mother's face. Instead, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Actually, I said, with a calm I was far from feeling, I'd like to conference someone in to help me understand these documents better. The atmosphere in the room changed in an instant. My mother's victorious expression vanished, and Marcus Thorne nervously adjusted his tie. That won't be necessary, my mother said quickly. We have all the expertise we need right here. I ignored her, dialing Julia's number and putting the call on speaker. Julia, I have you on speakerphone. I'm here with my family and some gentlemen who have presented me with legal documents to sign. Julia's clear, professional voice filled the room. Good evening, everyone. This is Julia Rios, Miss Vance's attorney. I understand you're proposing a transfer of assets into a family trust. The ensuing silence was deafening. Uncle Leo's face turned a deep shade of red, while Aunt Nina suddenly found her coffee cup fascinating. The three suited men exchanged panicked looks. You brought a lawyer into this, my mother hissed, her mask of maternal concern completely gone. This is a family matter. A family matter that involves legal documents declaring me financially incompetent, I shot back. That makes it a legal matter, too. Julia continued, her tone calm but firm. I've reviewed the text Miss Vance sent me. Any document that suggests a lack of financial capacity without a proper evaluation by independent medical and financial professionals could be considered fraudulent. I strongly advise Miss Vance against signing anything tonight. Marcus Thorne was the first to recover, shifting into damage control mode. We certainly had no intention of suggesting any impropriety. Perhaps we should reschedule for a time when everyone has proper representation. Or, I said, reaching into my purse again, we could discuss why these documents were even drafted. This time, I pulled out a folder I had compiled over the past few weeks. It was my contingency plan, one I had desperately hoped I would never have to use. Inside was documented proof of my mother's financial mismanagement spanning 2 decades. "I think it's time for a little transparency," I announced, opening the folder. "Since we're all so concerned about financial capacity, let's talk about who really shouldn't be in charge of money." My mother's face went pale. "What is that?" "This," I said, laying out the first document, "is a copy of your bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago. The one you told the family was just a minor financial restructuring." Uncle Leo leaned in, squinting at the paper. "Bankruptcy, Isabel. You said it was a refinancing issue." I continued, methodically placing more papers on the table. "These are records of loans from Grandma and Grandpa totaling over $170,000 in the last decade alone. Loans that were never paid back." My grandmother's hand trembled as she reached for her water. "And this," I said, adding another document to the pile, "is a record of Grandmother's antique jewelry collection, which mysteriously vanished piece by piece whenever you were short on cash. Pieces you claimed were being cleaned or repaired, but were actually sold." Aunt Nina gasped. "Mother's pearl necklace, the one that was supposed to go to Maya someday." "Sold to a pawn shop in 2018, I confirmed, "along with the emerald earrings and the diamond brooch from great-grandmother." My mother shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. "That's enough. This is preposterous. How dare you ambush me like this?" "Ambush," I echoed, gesturing around the room. "You mean like inviting me to a family dinner that was actually a legal trap with 3 strangers trying to steal my inheritance?" Julia's voice cut through the tension from the phone. "I should also mention that I have advised Miss Vance to document this entire conversation, which is legal in Pennsylvania as a one-party consent state." The attorney and notary exchanged horrified glances. The financial advisor started gathering his papers. "You've been recording us," my mother shrieked. "Your own family." "The same family that tried to have me declared financially incompetent," I countered. "Yes, I have." I turned to my grandmother, whose shocked face revealed she had no idea about the true nature of the evening. "Grandma, did you know this dinner was set up to force me to sign over Grandpa's inheritance?" She shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Isabel told me it was a reconciliation dinner, to heal the family." Uncle Leo stood up abruptly. "I think we should all just take a step back and cool off. There's clearly been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "My grandfather left his money to me because he knew exactly what would happen if he left it to Mom. The same thing that's happened to every single dollar that has ever passed through her hands. It would vanish into luxury cars, designer clothes, and vacations she can't afford." "You ungrateful little," my mother started, but Aunt Nina cut her off. "Isabel, is it true?" she demanded. "About Mom's jewelry, did you really sell our family heirlooms?" As the family's focus shifted to my mother, the 3 professionals made a hasty retreat. Marcus Thorne mumbled something about family matters to resolve as they scurried toward the door. "Don't forget your fraudulent documents," I called after them, pushing the papers toward the end of the table. "My attorney will be in touch about those lack of capacity clauses." With the outsiders gone, the family imploded. My mother, cornered and exposed, switched from denial to full-blown attack. "None of you have any idea the pressure I'm under," she yelled. "Do you know what it costs to maintain our family's standing?" "Your standing?" I questioned. or the standing you built with money you borrowed and never repaid. I deserve that inheritance, she cried, her carefully applied makeup starting to streak. I'm his daughter, not you. It should have been mine. And there it was, the raw truth behind all the schemes and manipulation. It wasn't concern for my well-being or the family legacy. It was simple, unadulterated greed and entitlement. Mom, I said, my voice softer now, Grandpa left you $50,000. That's a generous gift most people would be thankful for. Instead, you've ripped this family apart trying to take what isn't yours. Uncle Leo sank back into his chair, looking utterly defeated. Isabel, did you really spend all that money already? The inheritance you just received. My mother's silence was a confession. She stared at the table, refusing to look at anyone. It wasn't enough, she finally whispered. It's never enough. In that moment, I saw my mother with a new clarity, perhaps for the very first time. Not as a monster, but as a person trapped in a destructive pattern she couldn't break, endlessly chasing a sense of fulfillment through spending that only left her feeling more empty. But clarity did not mean I would give in. I gathered my documents back into the folder. I'm leaving now, I announced. And I'm taking my grandfather's inheritance with me, all of it. It's not because I don't love this family, but because I respect his wishes and the lessons he tried to teach all of us. I turned to my grandmother and gave her a gentle hug. I'm sorry this happened, Grandma. Call me tomorrow. We'll talk, just us. As I walked toward the door, my mother made one last, desperate plea. If you walk out that door with that attitude, don't you dare come back. You're choosing money over your family. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. No, Mom. I'm choosing boundaries over enabling. I'm choosing Grandpa's wisdom over your manipulation. When you're ready to get financial counseling and have a truly honest conversation, I'll be here. But not like this. Never again like this. And with that, I walked out, leaving behind the shattered pieces of an ambush that had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The drive home felt surreal. The streetlights blurred as unexpected tears streamed down my face, not tears of sadness, but of release. 29 years of walking on eggshells, of trying to please a person who could never be pleased, of being made to feel guilty for having boundaries. It all came to a head in that one moment of walking away. When I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I sat in my parked car for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to gather my strength for whatever came next. My phone was buzzing nonstop with texts from Uncle Leo, voicemails from my mother, and a message from Aunt Nina. I ignored them all and called Julia. You handled that incredibly well, she told me after I recounted the entire evening. Standing up for yourself like that takes immense courage. It didn't feel like courage, I admitted. It felt like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing, she replied. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps to make sure they can't try something like this again. I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face morphing from manipulative sweetness to raw fury. I replayed my grandfather's warnings, finally understanding the depth of what he had been trying to tell me. By sunrise, my resolve had hardened into a decision. This pattern of financial abuse in my family was going to end with me. Julia came to my apartment the next morning with coffee and a look of determination. We sat at my small kitchen table, mapping out a plan. Based on the recording and the documents, We have clear evidence of attempted fraud, she explained. That language about your lack of financial capacity was their way of laying the groundwork to contest the will by claiming you were incompetent. Should we press charges? I asked. Julia thought for a moment. We could, but lawsuits within families are messy and destructive. Instead, I suggest we draft a formal cease and desist letter. We'll outline the evidence we have and make it crystal clear that any further attempts to interfere with your inheritance will result in immediate legal action. She looked at me seriously. If they push it, we go to court. But let's start with a firm boundary. Sometimes that's all it takes. The cease and desist letter was delivered by courier to my mother's house that afternoon. I braced myself for an explosion of angry calls and threats. Instead, there was nothing. A complete and utter silence that lasted for 3 days. The quiet was almost more unsettling than the confrontation. On the 4th day, Uncle Leo called. His voice was weary and resigned. "Clara, I owe you an apology," he began, taking me completely by surprise. "I had no idea about the full extent of your mother's financial history or about the jewelry." "Did she admit to selling Grandma's heirlooms?" I asked. "Not directly," he sighed. "But your grandmother found some pawn shop receipts in Isabel's desk. It's been difficult here." "I'm sorry for that," I said, and I meant it. "But I'm not sorry for protecting myself." "I understand that now," he replied. "Your grandfather was right about you. You're the strongest one of us." Later, I received an email from Roger Sterling, the so-called financial advisor. He was formally terminating his professional relationship with my mother, citing ethical concerns and potential liability. He attached a chain of communication showing that my mother had approached him just days after the funeral, claiming I was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. The most unexpected communication came from Aunt Nina, who asked to meet for coffee at a neutral location. I agreed, cautiously. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived clutching a small velvet pouch. "I found this," she said, placing it on the table. "At a local pawn shop. The owner remembered Isabel." Inside was my grandmother's diamond brooch, a Victorian piece that had been passed down through 5 generations. "How did you?" I started. "I bought it back," she said simply. "It wasn't cheap, but it belongs with the family, with Grandma." Her eyes met mine. "I didn't know, Clara, about any of it. The bankruptcy, the loans. Isabel always made herself out to be the successful one. We all believed her." "That's how manipulation works," I acknowledged. Nina nodded slowly. "Your grandfather knew. He tried to tell us, but we just thought he was being controlling. Now I see he was just trying to protect the family assets from her." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on Isabel," she said. "She's not speaking to anyone. Frank drove by her house yesterday and saw a moving truck, but we don't know what it means." Later that day, my grandmother called, her voice small and shaky. "Clara, dear, I'd like to see you if you're up for it." I drove to her house right away. I found her in her garden, surrounded by wilting flowers. She looked older, smaller. "I failed you," she said as I sat beside her. "I failed all of us by enabling your mother for so long." "You loved her," I said gently. "We all did what we thought was right." She took my hand, her skin cool and papery. "Arthur saw it all so clearly. He was trying to protect us from ourselves." A tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. The jewelry, it was meant for you girls, for the future. Aunt Nina found the brooch, I told her. She bought it back. A faint smile touched her lips. That's a start. Perhaps not everything is lost. It's not about the things, Grandma, I said. It's about the trust. It's about knowing the difference between helping someone and enabling them. She squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. As the sun set, we talked about building new, healthier patterns for our family. For the first time, I felt like my grandmother saw me as an adult, not just a grandchild to be shielded, but a woman with her own hard-won wisdom. The final confrontation with my mother came out of the blue. A week later, I came home from work to find her sitting on the front steps of my apartment building. She looked deflated, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer armor. "Can we talk?" she asked as I approached. "Really talk, no fighting." Wearily, I led her up to my small apartment. She looked around at my modest furniture and the framed photo of my grandfather on my bookshelf. "I've been evicted," she said bluntly. "The house is in foreclosure." I wasn't shocked, but her directness was new. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not," she said, but without any bite. "And you shouldn't be. It's a consequence of my choices." She sat on the edge of my sofa, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "I sold the Lexus, canceled the cruise. Too little, too late, but it's a start." "Where will you go?" I asked. "Nina offered me her guest room, on the condition that I see a financial counselor and a therapist." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "My little sister, laying down the law." I remained standing, keeping my distance. "Are you going to do it?" "Do I have a choice?" she asked, then shook her head. "That's the wrong question, isn't it? I've always had choices. I've just consistently made the worst ones." For a fleeting moment, I saw something in her I'd never seen before, genuine self-awareness, free from justification or blame. "I'm not here for money," she continued. "I know I burned that bridge to the ground. I needed to say I'm sorry for the ambush, for trying to take what Dad left you, for all of it." I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In my fantasies, it always ended in a tearful reconciliation. The reality was far more complex. Her words sounded sincere, but one conversation couldn't erase decades of manipulation. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But trust has to be rebuilt over time. I can't just forget what happened." She nodded, a look of acceptance on her face. "I understand. I wouldn't either." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "The financial counselor Nina found." She said something that stuck with me. She said that money problems are almost never about money. They're about trying to fill emotional holes with material things. "That makes sense," I acknowledged. "I've been trying to fill a hole inside me for so long, I forgot what I was even missing." She glanced at the photo of my grandfather. "He tried to tell me that. I just wasn't able to hear it." As she reached the door, I found myself saying, "Mom, the counseling. I think it's a good step." She paused. "Me too, maybe someday. We could get coffee again, just coffee, no agenda." "Maybe," I agreed. "One step at a time." After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment, processing the encounter. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was messy and uncertain, but for the first time in our relationship, it was honest. I called Julia later that night to give her an update. "People can change," she said thoughtfully, "but it usually takes hitting rock bottom." "Do you think I should trust her?" I asked. "Trust is earned in inches, not miles," Julia replied. "If she's serious, she'll understand that you need to see consistent action over time. Your boundaries aren't a punishment. They're your protection while you both figure out what a healthier relationship looks like." That night, I looked at my grandfather's photo. "You were right," I told him softly. "About everything. I stood firm just like you asked. I just wish it didn't have to hurt so many people." In the silence, I could almost hear his gentle voice in my mind. "The truth often hurts at first, Clara, but it's the only foundation worth building on." The week after my mother's visit was strangely calm. No dramatic calls, no guilt trips, no manipulation. The quiet was both a relief and unsettling. That Friday, I got a text from Uncle Leo. "Isabel moved in with Nina yesterday. She's actually going to the counseling. Just thought you should know." I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me was deeply skeptical, but another part wondered if this time, the change might be real. My cautious optimism was shattered that weekend when distant relatives started contacting me. My mother, it turned out, had launched a social media campaign portraying herself as the victim of a cruel, ungrateful daughter who had stolen her inheritance and thrown her out on the street. "Is it true you're making your mother live in a shelter while you hoard a fortune?" one cousin demanded. "Your grandfather would be so ashamed," wrote one of my mother's friends. The messages were a tidal wave of outrage, all based on my mother's carefully edited narrative. I drafted and deleted a dozen angry replies before realizing that engaging would only feed the fire. Instead, I deactivated my social media accounts and focused on my own life. Julia helped me finalize the estate. With her guidance, I paid off my student loans, $62, 798, 83, a number that had haunted me for years. The day I got the confirmation that the balance was zero, I just sat on my sofa and cried with relief. With that weight gone, I started looking for a condo just outside the city center. Nothing fancy, but something that would be mine. I also invested in professional equipment for my freelance graphic design business. The bulk of the inheritance went into a diversified investment portfolio, following a conservative plan Julia helped me create. "This is what your grandfather would have wanted," she said. "Growth with protection." 3 weeks after the big confrontation, my grandmother Helen showed up at my door. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. I welcomed her in, and as I made tea, she looked around my small apartment. "It's cozy, very you." "It's temporary," I explained. "I'm looking for a condo to buy." She nodded in approval. Arthur would have thought that was very sensible. After a moment of silence, she said, "I've come about Isabel and to give you something." From her purse, she took out a small wooden box. It was my grandfather's collection of vintage fountain pens. "He wanted you to have these," she said, placing the box in my hands. I opened it, my throat tight with emotion. "Now about your mother," she continued. "She's staying with Nina, and I think this time might actually be different. She's really participating in the counseling. The counselor has her on a strict budget for the first time in her life." My grandmother smiled faintly. She was quite shocked to see how much she was spending on coffee shops. "That's good to hear," I said cautiously. "I'm not telling you to rush into anything," my grandmother said. "Trust has to be earned. I just wanted you to know there might be a reason for hope." Her visit left me feeling thoughtful. The following weekend, I drove up to the mountain cabin for the first time since I inherited it. The small cabin sat on 3 acres of wooded land in the Poconos, about 2 hours from Philadelphia. Unlocking the door, I was flooded with memories of fishing with my grandfather, autumn bonfires, and reading by the stone fireplace. I spent the day airing the place out and reconnecting with the one place that had always felt like home. Sitting on the porch as the sun set, I felt my grandfather's presence all around me. "I'm doing it, Grandpa," I said to the quiet woods. "I'm standing firm." Back in Philadelphia, I started therapy. Dr. Amelia Taylor specialized in family dynamics and financial trauma, a perfect fit for my situation. "Money issues are rarely just about money," she said in our first session, echoing my mother's recent insight. "They're about security, control, and self-worth." Over the next few months, Dr. Taylor helped me see how my family's dysfunction had shaped my own anxieties about money. Meanwhile, my new life was taking shape. I closed on a modest 2-bedroom condo. My freelance design business started to take off, and soon I had enough work to reduce my hours at my day job. I kept a careful distance from my mother, but Uncle Leo and Aunt Nina gave me occasional updates. She was selling her designer clothes, sticking with her counseling, and working a steady job as an office manager. Months after our confrontation, a handwritten letter from my mother arrived. "I'm not writing to ask for anything," it began. "I just wanted to say that I'm starting to understand how my behavior affected you. The counseling is hard but necessary. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm doing the work to change." It wasn't perfect, but it felt more real than anything she had ever said to me. I sent back a brief, cordial note acknowledging her efforts, making no promises. It was a small, honest step. As the seasons changed, I built a new life for myself, defined by my own choices, not by reactions to family drama. I hosted friends at the mountain cabin. I started volunteering, teaching a basic design workshop at a community center. Slowly, I was building a life that honored my grandfather's legacy while forging my own path. 6 months after the inheritance changed everything, I realized I was no longer consumed by anger at my mother. The feeling hadn't vanished, but it had lost its power over me. I had broken free from the destructive cycle. The inheritance hadn't just brought me financial security. It had given me a different, more profound kind of freedom. That evening, I called my grandmother and invited her to the cabin for the weekend. "I'm restoring Grandpa's old rowboat," I told her. "I thought you might like to see it." "He would love that," she said, her voice warm. "And so do I." As I hung up, I looked at my grandfather's photo. "The money was just money, Grandpa," I said softly. "The lessons you taught me, that was the real inheritance." A year passed. I celebrated the anniversary with a quiet dinner at the mountain cabin with my grandmother, Sophie, and Julia. My freelance business was thriving, and my condo felt like a true home. "A toast," Sophie said, raising her glass. "To Clara, who took an inheritance and built a legacy." "To standing firm," Julia added with a smile. "To Arthur," my grandmother said softly. I touched my glass to theirs. "To breaking cycles." Later, sitting with my grandmother by the fire pit, I told her my plan. "I've decided to start a scholarship, the Arthur Vance Financial Literacy Scholarship for first-generation college students." Tears welled in her eyes. "He would be so honored by that." My relationship with my mother had settled into a new, unexpected rhythm. We met for coffee now and then, the conversations cautious but real. She never asked for money. During one meeting, she showed me a notebook where she tracked every single expense. "I'm saving for a trip," she told me shyly. "Just a weekend in Vermont, properly budgeted and fully paid for before I go." For her, this was a monumental achievement. My Uncle Leo and I had also found a new respect for each other. Together, we set up a small trust for my grandmother, ensuring she would always be cared for. Aunt Nina had become an unexpected ally, working to track down and buy back the family heirlooms my mother had sold. During a weekend of repairs at the cabin, I found a hidden journal in my grandfather's desk, addressed to me. In his precise handwriting, he'd written about our family's patterns and his hopes for me. "Money itself is neutral," he wrote. "It simply amplifies what is already there. I trust you to use this inheritance as a tool for building a meaningful life, not as a substitute for one." I had those words framed and hung them in my office. The inheritance had given me financial security, but the real gift was the push I needed to heal. I learned that standing firm can be an act of love, and that forgiveness for myself was more important than forgetting the past. The greatest lesson was learning to separate the idea of family from the individuals within it. Honoring my family didn't mean enabling their destructive behavior. As I sat on the porch that evening after my guests left, watching the moonlight on the trees, I felt a deep sense of peace. "I kept my promise, Grandpa," I whispered to the night air. "I stood firm, and in doing so, I found a freedom I never expected." The gentle rustle of the leaves felt like applause. Whatever came next, I would face it not with fear, but with the hard-won wisdom that had become the inheritance that truly mattered. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure to secure your own future? Do you believe it's possible for people to genuinely change deep-seated habits like my mother started to? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story connected with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and creating your own path. Thank you for listening. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to draw a clear, firm boundary. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.